Good morning, everyone. This is Carlos Clanton, and you are here live with Carlos Clanton. I'm the Ward 3 representative on the Norfolk City School Board, and I am happy and excited to have you joining in with us today, or if you're watching the replay. I have an exciting, dynamic group of gentlemen who are going to be joining us today and a part of my Faith Leaders Conversations, and this today is beginning our part one. We want you to be involved in the conversation as we move on and talk about the various topics, and you can definitely do that by placing your questions and comments in the comment section on whatever service you're watching, whether that's on Facebook, Periscope, or even on YouTube. But thank you for being a part of part one of a series of conversations that I'm having with Norfolk's faith leaders. We're going to be discussing the role and impact that they're having within our communities, as well as addressing topics spanning from public education, voting, the 2020 census, poverty, criminal justice, and much, much more. And so I'm excited to have you here. And so we're going to jump right in with our first guest that I'm going to introduce here. He is none other than the Reverend Dr. William Tyree. He is the pastor of the First Baptist Church of Berkeley, and I'm going to bring him in right now. Reverend Tyree, good morning.
Good morning, Carlos, and to the listening and viewing audience, good morning. First and foremost, I pray that you and your families are doing well and safe in the midst of these pandemics that we're facing.
Great. Thank you. Our next guest that we have here is none other than the Reverend Dr. Keith Ivan Jones of the Shiloh Baptist Church, where he serves as senior pastor there. And so we're going to bring in Reverend Jones.
Good morning. We greet you in the name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Thank you, Brother Clanton, for this wonderful opportunity to share with you this morning.
Great. Glad to have you. Also joining us, and he's going to be coming in a little bit late, but as you know, a pastor's job and duty is never done. So we had a meeting this morning, and so the Reverend Jeffrey Guns, the senior pastor of Second Calvary Baptist Church, will be joining us momentarily, and we'll be bringing him into the conversation. So I just want to jump right in and get started with the gentleman that we have here. So Reverend Tyree, if you could tell us a little bit more about yourself, for anybody who doesn't know you, which I hardly doubt that there's a whole lot out there you don't, but go ahead and share a little bit about yourself.
My name is William D. Tyree III. I am the pastor of the First Baptist Church Berkeley in the city of Norfolk. Our ministry, believe it or not, has been around for 155 years. We started in 1865. And for that 155 years, I have been there for 58 of those 155 years of ministry. Second generation pastor. My dad pastored there for 32 years, and I am celebrating my 24th year, in my 25th year, to be 25 actually in May of 2021.
Great, congratulations on that. I tell you, First Baptist Berkeley, I know I grew up at First Baptist Lambert's Point. And I know that it's a beautiful church located in the south side of the city and has a great pastor. And I know that you were really involved in the community, and we're going to talk a little bit more about how your church is engaging within the community there and really making a positive impact. Reverend Jones, how about you share a little bit about yourself, sir?
Well, I am a native of Norfolk, grew up in an area that was called Connie Park in the Titustown section of Norfolk. And that was one of the public housing areas. Baptized in Mount Pleasant Baptist Church, Norfolk State University graduate, go Spartans, and graduate of also the School of Theology at Virginia Union, master's degree in counseling from Virginia State University, and a doctoral degree from Eastern University in marriage and family. I'm a retired Army chaplain, and I think that sense of caring to the Shiloh Baptist Church located on Park Avenue, 745 Park Avenue, right across the street from Norfolk State University, where we worship at 10:45 on Sunday morning, and take that same sense of passion to Shiloh Baptist Church, where we're trying our best to reach the world, preach the word, and teach the way.
Definitely. Now, I know that both of you are no stranger to being involved in the community. And so, of course, myself representing public education, being the Ward 3 member, I want to start that off with our first question. And that's, what do you feel is the most pressing issue in public education as it relates to our community right here in Norfolk? And I'll go ahead and start with you, Reverend Tyree.
The most pressing issue, if we were recall during before the actual civil rights movement started, separate but equal was the goal. This pandemic, COVID-19, has just really served to show that uh, the resources in communities are not equal. They can be divided digitally, they can be divided ethnically, they can be divided racially. There are haves and have-nots. And when the governor made a decision to have school buildings shut down and people to virtually learn at home, it created a host of problems for people who had to go to work and now are struggling to try to find childcare to take care of their child at home. It made it even more difficult because some of those homes did not have the necessary internet accessibility, whether it be from internet itself or whether it be from devices that a person would be able to do on it. Every home did not have dedicated space that a child could embrace as his or her learning environment. There were multiple elementary school age children per household, and just trying to be able to provide quality instruction. In addition to that, all of the educators did not necessarily have what it took to be able to thrive in a virtual environment. So one of the more pressing needs is to make sure that every home is assessed individually, recognizing one size does not fit all, or what are the unique characteristics in that home, and how can the school, the community partner together to help ensure that our children have the best chance of survival in a virtual environment. Children are going to be children. There are some children who had special needs before the pandemic. Those needs didn't go away. And so the way they get addressed during the pandemic is going to require some creativity, some specialization, and a plethora of resources to be able to help.
Definitely. How about you, Dr. Jones?
Well, thank you. You've asked about the most pressing need impacting our schools locally, but I want to go sort of nationally because it has a direct impact on what's happening in this local community. We have the Secretary of Education who does not waste any breath whatsoever as she speaks about, for lack of a better word, defunding public schools and sending monies to private schools and charter schools. And what that has done is that it's created, I think, a climate which seems to somewhat devalue the importance of schools and in our community. And so if you say that schools are so insignificant, public schools are so insignificant, and a public school education is so insignificant, you ask yourself the question, why would the best and the brightest of us want to become school teachers, invest ourselves in the educative system, when the trend, if at least if you listen to her and to people around her, would be to fund other types of institutions? It's not lost on me that in the late 1950s, in this Commonwealth of Virginia, rather than integrate the schools, there were several who moved with massive resistance to close schools in and around the Commonwealth of Virginia for any number of years rather than integrate those schools. It's the same type of devaluing, which as a consequence of them closing the schools, that's when all of those private schools jumped up. Norfolk Collegiate, Norfolk Christian School, Norfolk Catholic, all of those schools were a byproduct of the desegregation and the massive resistance, which gave opportunities for the majority to receive an education, but no opportunities for African Americans. And so we've got to ask ourselves the question, when she's speaking about charter schools, and when she's speaking about putting larger funds into private institutions, saying that we can all get vouchers, but the vouchers would not scarcely pay for what it will cost to put a person through school, what is she saying to us about the importance of public education? It has an impact.
Definitely.
on how we fund our schools.
Definitely. I think that you all bring definitely from both perspectives, from the national, who serves as Secretary of Education right now, and even correlating it to this current president with the pandemic that we're dealing with. Many respects, it has definitely pulled back the cover and shown a lot of inequities that we have within our current school division. I've often said that, we talk about separate but equal, but many of our schools are still in some form or fashion segregated in the respect of their resources and what's in place for them. And so as a school board member, we are working together now, really placing a focus. Our theme this year is on equity, trying to ensure that we look at, from the budget to our policies within the school division, how we can make that change and how we can close that gap. Because there are concerns. There's concerns that, as you talked about it, Reverend Tyree, everyone, it's not a cookie cutter approach when we talk about this virtual learning. There were students who had disabilities and inabilities to be able to learn in the classroom, and that didn't go away. And so now we're placing a new virtual experience in front of them that creates some greater challenges. So that kind of leads me into asking you two here, what are some of the things that you think that could be done to improve some of the issues that you mentioned? What could we do from a policy level, as a community level, to definitely address those issues here in our city? And I guess, since you're still up, I'll start with you, Reverend Jones.
Well, let me complete my answer then.
Okay,
if I speak about Ms. DeVos, then our most pressing issue, and this may not sound as though it's related to the schools at all, but it has everything to do with the schools, is for us to get out the vote on November the 3rd. We've got to turn this thing around, and we've got to get a different administration in there that sees the priority of public school education. And so that vote even impacts our schools and the climate of education. And along with the vote, the census is about to end, to make sure that the census, and that we are counted in the census as well. So all of those things impact funding for schools. It impacts the, for lack of a better term, command climate in the school system, whereby people value what they're doing and they feel valued for what they're doing.
Definitely. How about you, Reverend Tyree?
Thank you for the question. Philosophically speaking, I think one of the things that's necessary that we need to look at and that needs to take place is the reality that education has been defunded probably for at least the last 10 to 20 years, where money, when the lottery was introduced, the way it was sold and communicated was that our schools win. What a lot of individuals are not understanding is the fact that money that would have been budgeted for education, because of the anticipated revenue that the lottery would bring, was defunded. The approach to the problem, in my opinion, would be, what does it take to ensure strong, healthy communities and vibrant, where we produce and raise citizens who will make a positive impact? And so in doing that, I think that there are several things that need to take place. First of all, people need to be informed. They need to know what the current situation is now. In an environment where education is being privatized, and what it does is it lends itself to more charter schools, more houses of worship, establishing schools. And in the process, since the African American church has historically been a beacon of light in the center of urban communities where predominantly African Americans who are disenfranchised exist, then there's no champion for their cause and there's no voice for them. The persons who are disadvantaged have a voice and are more than capable of speaking for themselves. However, at the time where their voice needs to be heard, a person doesn't necessarily have the luxury of being able to take off from their job to attend a critical meeting. At the time where a person might be looking to go to a PTA meeting because it's in the evening and there are multiple children that need to be fed, assisted with their homework, get put to bed so that the next day there's an adult or adults might be productive at work while the child can get some rest that's needed before they approach learning environment again. So The African American church, the Black church historically, has raised these issues in a platform where people, once they are informed, can now be involved to do something. The next thing that has to be done is people need to be inspired. We cannot be in a situation where we feel it does not pertain to us. We have to see that every child who does not have an opportunity could potentially not just be our child or grandchild, but also our doctor in the future, our city council person, our educators. All realms and walks of life are going to be filled by a generation that we can impact for good now. Therefore, inasmuch as education was started to meet the needs of the business communities, businesses that are in communities that are receiving tax breaks and tax credits need to refund and invest in these communities in which they are benefiting and profiting from, to make sure that they have all of the state-of-the-art equipment that's necessary, that programs are in place to attract the best and the brightest of teachers in these communities, because part of their social consciousness is to be aware and make a difference, that the digital divide becomes less of a divide as resources are provided so that those historically disadvantaged communities can now thrive in an environment. And that has been proven in this area. The reason I say that, you look at the Early Childhood Education Center that's right on Canoga Street, I believe, in Campostella Heights, has been an Apple certified school where you have 3, 4, and 4-year-olds writing program code. That's proof positive that it can be done, and when resources are properly allocated, where staff is adequately trained and equipped, they can show up and make a difference, and the community can be elevated.
Great points, definitely. So you mentioned some great things there, and I know that both of you have a heart and a passion for education, and I know that in some form or fashion, your ministries are also informed and involved in the community. So I just want to give you an opportunity to share some of the activities or programs that you're currently doing to address some of the issues that you've mentioned. And so who'd like to go first?
Well, historically, what we have done at Shiloh, historically, we've done tutorial type work. And we have, I don't know, let me go back history for just a moment.
Okay.
This is, I don't know how far history, but there was a time in Norfolk public schools that a young lady who was pregnant could not go or attend classes.
Yeah.
And Shiloh began the first school for unwed mothers during that time. I see scores of young ladies who will come through and say, you know, I went to this school when I didn't have any other type of hope, and now I'm this or now I'm that, and I thank God. So there's a historical relevance of the church in the community, and what we're trying to do is to continue that type of legacy. We have some networks with one of our local schools in terms of a community garden, which gives children an opportunity to see something grow and to be a part of a growing process, to understand that vegetables don't just come from stores, but it comes through the work of one's hands. And so we try our best to stay in touch with those with the public schools. I recognize that for all of our churches, there's a challenge for us. And I dare really want to talk about the challenge. We have a drain, especially in the inner city churches, of young people and energies that can help us impact the schools in our own neighborhoods. One of the things that I tell my church quite frequently is that the rent that we pay to live in our neighborhood is to be an integral part of the neighborhood and to be a part of our schools. But we are victim of our own success, because out of our churches have come judges and doctors and lawyers and engineers and people who have grown up in the church, but now they go to places other than the church. Um, some of them I call golf playing people. Sunday morning tea times and those types of things. So our challenge is always, we call it evangelism, but to recruit some of those bright minds who feel as though that they can come back and help the community that they live in. W.E.B. Du Bois spoke about the talented tenth who, when they grew up and when they were educated, would come back to the community and contribute to the community. But years later, he bemoaned the fact that not too many were coming back. Mm-hmm. So we still have that challenge in this day and time.
Great points, great points. Reverend Tyree.
Yes, sir. Before COVID-19, we were actively involved in tutoring students during the school day at the school in our neighborhood, which would be St. Helena Elementary School. I have gone on record privately and publicly, and now's another opportunity. Our commitment at First Baptist is to be a part of making St. Helena the best school in Norfolk. That means whatever resources that we have been blessed with, we have no problem being able to use them to make a difference there. When I say make a difference, one of the reasons why we opted to be tutoring during the daytime as opposed to after school was the challenge of making sure, and the safety of making sure that students could get home during the time of period when it was dark, since they spend the majority of the day in the classroom at the school, to be able to, because as I have shared with the current principal and the previous principal, we are your staff. Mm-hmm. Deploy us however you need to, whether it's to help build the skill set of parents so that they can assume and take the leadership of the parent-teacher association, whether it be to provide a mediator services between the home and the school with people that parents are comfortable with, to be able to provide a safe environment and real estate where tutoring can take place. We want to do it during the school hours so that children did not feel singled out or stigmatized. Mm-hmm. I think in today's climate, particularly with a school not being fully accredited, because you've got the Virginia Department of Education, you have the Norfolk school system that has requirements, you have others who are quick to provide assistance. The administration staff can become so overwhelmed that they end up chasing deadlines as opposed to addressing the issue of the problem. What is it going to take for us to produce high-value citizens with quality education? A lot of people are not aware that third grade is the grade where the current system decides how many more prisons are they going to build. Now, why is that? Well, because third grade is where a child has transitioned or begins the transitioning process from learning how to read to reading to learn. And that becomes significant. That being the case, then, it would make sense to have your best and brightest teachers from K up to second grade to ensure that every second grade student knows how to read, so that when they get to third grade, the transition is a whole lot easier. So we look to be a part of that. We look to also expose our youth and young people to career opportunities where they can make viable income and provide for themselves. Because what happens, the cycle that happens in communities where not enough attention is given to help develop the child's skill set, they are not performing, they're not learning. Other children start make fun of them. The natural reaction is to lash out, doesn't want to be made fun of. The child gets suspended. Well, a child gets suspended. They're missing out now on education and learning opportunities, particularly if it's out of school suspension. It becomes for the child a quote vacation. Parent has to work, just can't stay home or take off because the child was suspended. Is the child going to follow the instructions that have been given to him or her by their parent while they are away for another 6 to 8 hours at work? Probably not. So then they become bait for other people whose testimony is the same. They did not do well in school. I'm just like you, but look at me. I can buy the things that I want because I found a means of being able to make income doing things that are not legal. Now, I don't think a person wakes up in the morning and says, I want to live a life of crime. I think crime becomes a result when they have no other skill set to be able to make a living, and not just to make a living, but a sustainable wage and living. If we address that issue from the beginning with solid education system, school system, support both in the school, in the community, and at home, because we're working synergistically to do that, then we can create a person who knows that with the education, with the skill set that they have, they will in turn have employable skills. And if we have in a community like Berkeley, several shipbuilding entities that are in the trillions of dollars in terms of revenue and income, supporting and behind that, then they have positions where these boys and girls can become naval architects, where they can become engineers, project managers, and the like. And they're investing on the front end, as opposed to having to invest insurance-wise from alcoholism or any substance abuse or any other intervention programs, because they didn't take a proactive approach to want to make a difference.
Definitely. Gentlemen, both of you have shared a great deal of information from the historical aspect. Reverend Jones, I didn't realize that Shiloh had offered that need, that service to our community, particularly to our public schools, before we had Coronado. And it really begs to the connection that I see with our overage for grade. The number of students who can't read at that read or write at that third grade level, for which you oftentimes you hear about the school to prison pipeline. And as a board member, now into my third year, one of my hardest duties that I have to do is when I have to sit in a panel and oversee a child's whether or not they're getting expelled from school. And oftentimes I ask that question, well, so we kick them out of school, and what's happening? How are they still learning? I mean, they're now getting back another year behind, and we're just perpetuating the situation. And so I've made a commitment myself personally this year, now serving on the policy committee, to review with our administration the policies that we have in place to find alternative methods and means for which not to kick our students out of school, but to really dig deeper to find out what are some of the root causes for which the students are acting out. I truly believe that every child wants to learn, but there are other extenuating factors that play into that. Yes, sir.
And to that point, prior to this COVID environment, one of the things that we were looking to do is to institute a program that I've kind of dubbed Stay Up While You're Out, designed specifically for that person. The school has to make a decision. Do we sacrifice the one on behalf of the many? And they might.
Yeah.
It's the school decision. Community decision is, yes, we see potential in you. We want to invest in you. So while you are out, we've got, praise God, a plethora of retired educators who can donate their time. We've got plenty of space Certainly, we could benefit from the resources that some of these shipbuilding companies have to put state-of-the-art learning equipment in our facilities so that we can do that and provide students with the skill sets that are necessary and employable so that they can become viable, productive citizens. Because one bad decision ought not to penalize a child for the rest of his or her life. And because we are in the heart of the community, as a matter of fact, for those who don't know the geography of where we are bordered by a cemetery on one side and the Boys and Girls Club on the other. And as I say, that's a visible illustration that from the womb to the tomb, the church is supposed to make a difference.
All right. Definitely, for those who are joining us now and you're watching this video, this is a part of a series of conversations that I plan to have with Norfolk faith leaders and to talk about a plethora of different discussion items and topics. And we're getting a great deal of knowledge and history in regards to how the church, and I dare to say the Black church today, has played within our communities, particularly here in Norfolk. And so we definitely want you to be a part of the conversation. So if there are questions or things or comments that you have, we ask you to place them in the comment section there. But we have Reverend Dr. William T. Tyree III, who is the pastor of the First Baptist Church of Berkeley. And we also have with us the Reverend Dr. Keith Ivan Jones, who is senior pastor at Shiloh Baptist, with us today. And so I want to go ahead and kind of wrap in, because Reverend Jones, you kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, and some of the additional topics here. So my next question for you is, historically, the Black church has played a significant role in the fabric of our community. Given the current climate and so with so much social unrest, do you feel the role is just as important as it was in the past, as it is today? And if so, why? And so I'll kick it off with you, Reverend Jones.
Well, thank you for that question. It's a great question. And in fact, of all your questions, I focused on that one the most, because I began to ask myself the question, what do you mean by the Black church? The reality is that the historical Black church was a church that was always grounded with a theology and a sociology that was about the business of liberating people who were disenfranchised, mistreated, underserved. We saw that not as extraneous or an extra ministry, but we saw that as integral to what we do as the church, to feed the hungry, to clothe the naked, to preach truth to power, to speak about social injustices. The Black clergy person was often the most educated person in the community. And so the people who looked at the church would look to the church for advice regarding business transactions, how to understand the code language of politicians. That was the role of the traditional Black church. It was part of our preaching, part of our singing, very, very much a part of our worship. But I want you to know that in this day and time that we have a church that's out there that may be full of people that you may call Black people, but it's not necessarily the Black church. In fact, if we were to talk about social justice, if we were to talk about liberation theology or anything like that, they'd be woefully offended. They are people who have benefited from what Martin Luther King did, but would never do what Martin Luther King did. And often, once again, they're the talented 10th. They go to churches which, if you close your eyes, will resemble often some white evangelical churches in their pronouncement, in their worship style, and they don't want to be bothered. I don't know that maybe the issues that we deal with are grim reminders of where they came from, but they don't want to be reminded of their past. So I beg the notion that just because a church is full of Black people doesn't mean that it's a Black church. I've got to suggest that to you. And even at the corpus, in the pulpit, are those of us who would rather cause people to feel good than to challenge people to be about the business of liberation and social justice and working in the community. I have often said that pulpits are often the place of the greatest dope pushers in the community. Not in not in the streets, not on the corner.
Mhm.
But we can get people high on Sunday, and as long as they can get a fix, they'll feel comfortable. That's not good conversation among a lot of preachers. That's not a comfortable conversation, but it's very true. Our challenge as the Black church, is to recognize that of all the institutions in the community, this is probably the most stable institution, the most long-standing institution, the institution that's the most independent institution, the institution that has the greatest ability to address some of the ills of our society. So the short answer to your question is yes, that this church should still, or the church should still have a role in the community. The other thing that I had said to you earlier is that we have so many people, and I think about my church, people come from Chesapeake and from Suffolk and from Portsmouth and from Virginia Beach and from Smithfield, and they come into church on Sunday and they leave church at the end of the worship service. And I say again and again to them that the rent that we pay for living in this community is to be an integral part of our community and to address the ills that the people in the community are experiencing.
Right. Powerful there. How about you, Reverend Tyree?
Absolutely. Is the Black church necessary? Yes. And there are three things, in my opinion, that need to happen. Number one, people need to be informed. Believe it or not, even in this age of information, there is willful ignorance where people distance themselves and live in an insulated bubble as far as what's going on around them. And it takes an educated voice from the pulpit to help educate a community. I'm going to come back to that in a second. The next thing is people need to be inspired. Now, they are informed and inspired for the purpose of moving them to involvement. And then the third thing that needs to happen in the church is that people need to be involved. Now, one of the notions is in terms of why the Black church, or predominantly Black church, not just church that's filled with Black people, but churches that have historically understood this as being their calling into the world. It's not gospel that's been slanted to view things from a Black perspective. It's the
gospel.
Actual representation of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Because if you are not looking at the gospel through the lens of oppression that was being instituted by the Roman government, then you have missed the gospel, which is why you do not see mainstream non-African American pastored churches even speaking out against it. Number one. Number two, one of the things in terms of information that every African American person in the world needs to understand is that the system in America is broken. And anybody who has succeeded in it just needs to understand they have succeeded in a broken system. Now, if I'm an African American and I've succeeded in a broken system and I'm in a position to affect change, I might not be willing to change anything because it is working for me, even though it's broken. And that's where we really have to call it out, because there are too many people, as Dr. Jones said, who benefited from the civil rights march of the 60s, but never participated in it. And now is the time when some of them for involvement, they might be too old to lead in the movement, but they need to be out there, hands up, don't shoot. They need to be out there supporting Black Lives Matter. They need to be there speaking truth to power. Why? First of all, I'm baffled at where we are in America and how on earth did we get there. It was 194 days that the cry had gone out. The hashtag had been present, Breonna Taylor. With the millions of hashtags, with the prominent voices like Oprah Winfrey, voices like LeBron James, voices like Kerry Washington, who were calling for, from their platform, justice for Breonna Taylor. And her family can receive $12 million for wrongful death. But then 194 days later, nobody is found wrong for her death. And the one officer who was charged got charged because of 3 bullets that missed her. Now, here's my point. If that cannot happen in America for a person who received that much support, then what chance do I stand? What chance does grandmama stand? What chance does mama stand? Daddy stand? Your sons, your daughters, your nieces and nephews. Our voice needs to be heard. And we need to shout it unapologetically from the housetops.
And as much as I agree with Dr. Tyree, I say again, the people who are at the point where they can effect changes are all people who don't want to be reminded of the change that they can effect. And they, again, have benefited from the civil rights movement. And now they go to places where they will never be reminded of the people who have benefited them. They go to worship in places, if they go to worship at all. And that's a plague that threatens the future of the Black church, is a plague which threatens our community as well.
And thank you for bringing it up again, Dr. Jones, because there was something else that I wanted to say, but I'm about to have another birthday and I don't remember stuff like I used to. So let me add to what he said. We've got a generation of young people that don't go to church, and they don't go to church because their parents and maybe grandparents didn't go to church. Parent at 16, grandparent at age 32, great-grandparent at age 48, okay? So we've got generations that don't go. Now, here's the issue with that. Any African-American, my generation, who's been in church, always knows that even from the pulpit, the pastor was always blending the Bible and culture. So in other words, if I want to communicate a sense of my frustration, I might look out in the congregation and say something like, in the words of Grandmaster Flash, "Don't push me, cause I'm," and then folk would start responding back, "close to the edge." This generation hasn't seen anything like that, quoting Nipsey Hussle, Big Sean, or Jay-Z. So consequently, they are in isolation. This generation has seen more of their friends and family die to gun violence or even to the effects of COVID-19 as it starts affecting younger generation of people. And so when the church is not saying anything about the injustice of what happens to African-American boys and girls, men and women, then the message that they receive is the church doesn't care. And when you go out and you see those people who are protesting, you don't see a lot of people, our generation, out there. You don't hear a lot of the voice that could be supportive, that could provide some guidance that might make a difference out there. Why? Because they have resolved that since we don't care, they're not going to put up with it like our generation has. And they need to know that, yes, we want them in the fight. And if we don't have the energy to march with them, we ought to use whatever position, power, platform we have to elevate the mindset and to support them with what they need.
Definitely. I tell you, I'm inspired this morning. I always enjoy speaking with you, brothers. You always remind me of even my role in the effect as a policymaker that I have on the school board and the charge that I have. But the timing that we have right now, we do have Dr. Guns. He's joined. I'm going to bring him in to join him in with this conversation. And so here we go. Good morning, Dr. Guns.
Good morning, brothers. I'm so sorry for being late. I was with another group of community leaders, and the meeting went much longer than had anticipated because of the severity of the issues and things that are being addressed. But thank you nonetheless. So please accept my humblest apologies. I did everything I could
Not a problem.
to be present and on time. You are sitting with two of the premier leaders in our city, Pastor William Tyree and Pastor Keith Jones, two of the most highly revered men in the community. And as the Lord said to Peter, James, and John on the Mount of Transfiguration, listen to them.
Well, we're glad to have you this morning and to bring you in with the conversation. We were just talking about the historical context of the Black church and the significant role that it's played in the fabric of our community. Mm-hmm. And I know that, with Second Calvary, you have a long history as to where the church is. And there's many things that you're doing and involved in the community. And so I just will yield an opportunity for you to express what you're doing in the community as it relates to public education. And we're going to start talking about more of the criminal justice reform and social injustices. But we want to give you that opportunity, that platform to talk about Second Calvary and your ministry and what you're doing in the city of Norfolk.
Well, thank you so very much. Second Calvary has been involved in social activism and community service and ministry since its founding. And I have just been privileged and fortunate to stand upon the shoulders of pastors who've gone before me, who've left a sterling legacy of service. Right now, what we are really engaged in is really trying to work with people in terms of the voter registration and the census, understanding that voting is going to be the key to electing individuals who will foster through policy the kinds of things that will pave pathways to prosperity for African Americans, for Black people. Now, I make no apologies for being unapologetically pro-Black. Not that I'm not for anyone else. I am just simply an advocate for issues and things that relate to Black people in the city of Norfolk, whether that's voting, education, economics, and all the way around. So we're doing some things with voter education. We've got some other efforts that we're going to be undertaking. We are involved with education. We seek to make a difference through the kinds of things that we've done with education. We'd like to be involved with some housing programs. We do have some housing that we rent for Section 8 tenants, and just a whole number of things that we've done in terms of criminal justice, working with families, providing people an opportunity to move from poverty to prosperity, Christian education, and I guess I could, and our whole missions effort. So I could probably speak more definitively, if there's specific questions that I'm asked about the things that we do. We seek to be a community church with a global vision, working specifically in our community with Randy Village, Chesterfield Heights, Chesterfield Academy, and in that area, and in the broader Broad Creek area.
Definitely. Well, we're going to appreciate that, Reverend Guns. Go ahead, Reverend Tyree.
I'm about to say, if I could chime in, a Second Calvary this past Thursday was a testing site for COVID-19, where men and women in our city could go there and be tested, and also receive food from the food bank and other services to help make a difference. I don't know if Dr. Guns has those statistics yet in terms of how many were tested. I just want, he's doing so much.
I can share that information. Yeah, we did three things on that day. Last Thursday, the 24th, we hosted the COVID-19 testing site. We tested 110 people on Thursday between the hours of 9 and 11. We also distributed more than 100 boxes of food and other fresh vegetables. And we had a voter registration site set up to disseminate information about voting and registration and the things that people need to do in order to make sure that their vote counts. And so we had a good day in terms of reaching the community and trying to do things to build capacity and to really kind of help our community to understand the importance of healthcare and getting tested and staying safe. We also distributed more than 200 packages of masks.
Brother Clanton, you asked about the role of the Black church. This is significant as we speak about that, because we have discovered that 68% of the positives in the city of Norfolk and in this area are African American. Oh. At the very onset of this COVID testing, the major hospital in this area had no clue about how to reach the African American community in terms of testing. And they tried to venture out on their own to go into one of the public housing areas and received only 2 people who volunteered for testing. Very little trust for that major healthcare organization. And
Centera by name.
Yeah, I would be, okay, Centera by name. And they had no clue whatsoever. No. And when they finally did decide to do community testing out in sites, they decided of all places to go out to Princess Anne and to Military Circle Shopping Mall, where every person who could come to the test had the means by which they could drive to the test. Yeah. And so the CEO said to me, well, 40% of the people who were tested were African American. I said, but that does not mean that they were underserved. Those were people who had cars and the access. And by the way, at the same time, the Hampton Roads Transit had cut their routes almost in half. And so there was little access to testing with a virus that was impacting our community in a greater way. So the Black churches got involved. And as a consequence, the testing in the Black community has gone up exponentially. And,
you all have definitely, and not only did you come together, in some respect, you've heard about the whole separation of church and state. But you all, and I have to make my viewers aware of this, have really embraced the partnership and being a trusted partner with the city of Norfolk. And you not only have been, that sounding board to express issues, but also going back into your respective communities to reach people. But you all created a video to show how easy the testing was, because there was so much, there was so much leeriness. And even when we start hearing about a vaccine that may be coming here, that polls still show across the country that large numbers of African Americans are concerned about that. But I'd like for you to delve a little bit more into your partnership and how you all are working together. Go ahead, Brother Tyree.
Well, I want to comment on the testing piece, Brother Clanton. When I believe it was April, that it was announced nationally that this disease is disproportionately affecting African American people. That came out nationally. Within 7 days, the next national response is, okay, it's time to open up the community. We want to get haircuts. We want to get tattoos. Yeah. Folk are protesting their First and Second Amendment rights at the expense of minority people for whom there is no cure or vaccination. And so we raised this issue with the city as early as April.
Actually, the first week of March.
You know, I thought it was more so than that, but I knew I could be definitively safe if I said April. Okay, so that's how far back this goes. Now, one of the things was to get some of the people who sit in power, who are African American, to recognize that the way you reach some of these communities is not through your website. It is not through them calling into the health department. But if you bring it to the communities, these churches can get the people there. Well, the response was, we have to make it open to the public. Fine. And so our testing event here in Berkeley was two churches that partnered, the Antioch Baptist Church and First Baptist. We tested 250 people in a 4-hour span. 58 of those were walk-ups. And if we had been here longer with more tests, probably would have had more walk-ups as people went back. Of those persons that came, one of the walk-ups was a woman, 92 years old.
Oh.
And there were people from other communities who did come to a testing site here. And what we have advocated for is, if you make it easier for those in communities that oftentimes get overlooked, you're not keeping people who do have transportation and who want to get tested from coming.
Definitely.
And so some of the community leaders got a chance to see that firsthand themselves when they saw the diversity, the people that were coming up, the people who had made appointments, as well as, and I think what really blew their mind was the fact that there were 58 walk-ups to be tested. And on that day, we served 150 boxes of food from the food bank.
Wow.
One of the things that being a trusted partner has made us aware of is not just the disparity in getting information out to our communities, but also a disparity in terms of investment, in terms of making things available to our community. And one of the statistics that we saw recently is that the city had garnered about $154,000 in publicity regarding COVID testing. But that statistic still does not say how much the city itself invested in publicity. So if you say that 68% of the people in the community who are positive are African American, the question is, what is your investment in getting to the African American the type of communication so that he or she can get tested or go to get treatment or whatever is necessary? And that's where people like you come in, Mr. Clanton, and people who are in elected office. We elect you to do three things. One, to give us information. But two, to sit and wait for our feedback. And three, to vote the feedback of your constituency. And it's far too often that we see people who are in elected offices who don't give information. They don't look for or solicit feedback, but they sure do a lot of voting, which has nothing to do with the constituency that they serve.
Wow.
I think that's part of the role of the Black church to make folks aware when we have people who supposedly represent us who are not representing us.
And I appreciate that. And I was going to say this a little bit later, but as a reminder for those who are watching and those who are part of my constituency in Ward 3, I'm having my first of this school year, my first Norfolk Schools Ward 3 community conversation, and that'll be held live at 6 o'clock this coming Tuesday in preparation before I go into another school board meeting on the 30th. And I'll just kind of put this out here that on the 30th, we intend to have the Director of Public Health. There has been a large outcry of parents and community members for the school division to really come up with a solid reentry plan and what that looks like. I've also made it very publicly known that I've adopted the National Urban League's plan on Restart Smart, which covers 4 main areas, and health and safety being the first and foremost. And so on October 7th, the school board and its work session will look at that hybrid plan that the superintendent will present to us. But you're right. I've definitely making sure we get information out to our to the community. We're listening for that feedback. And then as elected officials, making sure that we act on behalf of what our constituency and what our community say that they need. But a lot of times they'll make that decision based on having informed information.
I would dare to ask you a question, to give you an example of that type of thing. You sit on the school board, and there are some plans and hopes and desires. There's going to be a referendum on this next ballot regarding a casino. Mm-hmm. And from all recent intelligence, it sounds as though the casino is going to be built right in the back door of one of your middle schools. Mm-hmm. Where does the school board stand on that sort of thing, having a casino with all the types of people who venture and visit casinos, those who have some with poor intentions and some who bring in all types of other things which are associated with gambling? Where does the school board stand in building a casino within 400, 600 yards of one of your schools?
Mm-hmm. Well, to be perfectly honest, we haven't had a discussion as a board about the casino. And I know that it's been an item that's been up for discussion probably at least for the last year here. However, I am an individual who is looking at, having served on the facilities committee for the school board, looking at the fact that the average age of our school buildings are 50 years old. And in order to build new schools, you have to have dedicated revenue. But that dovetails back to what prior statement that Reverend Tyree talked about in respect to the Virginia Lottery. The Virginia Lottery was put in place. And I'll even go back even further. I remember as a child, as a teenager, at First Baptist Lambert's Point, where my pastor at that time was Reverend Anthony Page. And I remember that they were trying to get riverboat gambling. And I remember that was coming through. So this is not something new. It's, now we've finally gotten it through the General Assembly in the respect that we can make it legalized. In Norfolk's been, and Portsmouth and some others have been designated. But we've got to find additional revenue streams in order to help affect, but also looking at the current revenue streams that we have, prioritizing where those funds need to go. And I don't think that enough has been placed in public education in regards to the facilities and the investment. And so when we look at this, the casino, I look at it 2 different ways. I look at it in the respect that, yes, you look at the other side, that it could bring hospitality jobs. It can bring a new tax base. But there is a certain element that comes along with that. I've witnessed that when I was national president with the Urban League Young Professionals, and we had our first conference in Baltimore. Baltimore has the Golden Horseshoe. And I remember having an event there and going, and it was probably about 1 something in the morning. We were finishing up, leaving there, and the element. Now, I had never been around a casino. This was my first time in a casino. And I was kind of taken back at the element that was brought into that establishment. So I am really an individual who is trying to find opportunities to generate revenue, generate jobs, but I'm not doing it at the cost that it's going to create other issues in our community. And so we haven't had that conversation, but I definitely will bring it up in our board member matters on this coming Wednesday, because I think that we do. This is on the ballot. It is on the November 3rd ballot. It is on the ballots that individuals are receiving right now. There's a referendum in regards. And I'll just have to say that for me, I'm kind of torn, and that's being full transparent in the respect. I understand where it's located. That's my concern, where it's located behind that school. But I'm also looking at the respect of how do we generate additional revenue in the city? And COVID has definitely shown to us that we don't have enough diversity in our revenue streams. When we shut down the city in the 4th quarter, we lost $40 million in 1 quarter, which is then, tighten our budgets. We're looking here at the state right now, where they're looking at $95 million taking out of public education, another $93 million in the second biennial in public education. And how does that correlate back to Norfolk Public Schools? That's $1.5 million. And the short skinny of that, that's people. And so I will always say that I'm open but I'm always going to vote the conscience of what my constituents want me to do. This is why I'm having this conversation on Tuesday, and always looking for opportunities that's going to bring the best for all that are involved.
So the best place to bring that up would be on Tuesday night with your constituency,
Yeah.
if they have any feelings about the casino.
Definitely, that's one of the topics that we're going to talk about. Yes, sir.
And to that point, that $40 million deficit. Again, I go back to my premise at the beginning of our conversation today, that the tragedy of COVID-19 just simply magnified and maybe to some degree intensified, but I don't think it really intensified. I think it just magnified the level of disparity between the have and the have-nots.
I agree.
So for some families and communities, when you say things are going to have to be done virtually at work and with school, that wasn't an issue. They didn't miss a beat.
Mm-hmm.
When you talk about a city losing $40 million revenue, one of the first places that they look to cut would be probably public libraries. Public libraries in the city of Norfolk are a safe haven for homeless people.
Yeah.
It allows them the opportunity to experience warmth in the winter, air in the summer, while they are looking for employable skills if they don't already have, or looking to improve their skill set. When you talk about $40 million deficit, recreation centers are one of the first to go. Recreation centers provide after-school support for children, and in some cases, maybe even for lack of a better way of saying it, well, childcare for students who, after school, have a safe place that they can be until the responsible parent or grandparent or guardian comes and picks them up. When those resources are gone, you have certainly impacted the quality of life for families who already were struggling. Now, I agree that we might need multiple streams of income. But I also say, with Norfolk being the world's largest naval installation, that we have a gold mine of an opportunity with military contribution, with, or DOD contribution, if you will, with these shipbuilding industries pouring into the revenue. That doesn't have to be a casino to rob the pockets of poor people, to pay for services that the government ought to be supplying. And that's essentially what happens. You don't find rich people going to the casino. It's poor people who want the chance of getting rich so that the revenue that comes from that can support the services that the same poor people need. You cannot build anything strong and healthy on the backs of poor people. And it's time for our leaders to just hold these businesses accountable. And if they don't know what to do, we tell them, give me the money and I'll show them how it's done.
Definitely. So, brothers, it's 11:11. I wanted to definitely keep it within an hour. So I'm going to frame this final question and comment here, and I'm going to start with Reverend Keith Jones. And so, Reverend Jones, once you finish, I know that you've got to leave. You're more than happy to leave, and we appreciate you definitely adding here. And I hope to have you back at another point. But yesterday, a federal judge ruled in favor of the National Urban Leagues, who led a lawsuit in regard to the extension of the census. And we kind of talked about this a little bit with the census and voting. And so we have now until October 31st. So how important is the census to the community? I know you all kind of mentioned it, because when we talk about these resources and how that dovetails and how important it is, I'd just like for you to kind of give us your 60-second or less, thoughts on that, the census, on voting, voter registration. People have until October 13th to do that. So I'll go ahead and start with you, Reverend Jones.
Well, thank you so much. The census is important in terms of funding for individual municipalities, for individual precincts and districts and areas. And the census is important also as we talk about realignment of precincts and districts and all the things which ultimately result in gerrymandering. And so it's important that we do the census. I understand that there are many people in our community who are suspicious of people coming to our doors and asking what seem to be personal questions, but it's extremely important. And we hope that one of the things that we have been doing is to encourage people. We have several census workers in our congregation to encourage people to fill out the census, but it's extremely important.
Right, definitely. Dr. Keith Ivan Jones, Senior Pastor at Sallow Baptist Church, I appreciate you, and you can definitely have a great day. And like I said, I look forward to having you again. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. Thank you so much. God bless you all. Thank you.
Bless you, Doc.
So, Dr. Guns, the census, voting, how important and how do you feel as though individuals can get involved?
First, I'll just kind of confirm what Dr. Keith Jones said. The census is critical. It's critical to every major metric within our community. The census is going to determine the amount of resources that flow specifically into the school system, because many of these schools are already underfunded. And if you reduce the population count in these communities, then you're going to begin, I don't know what the exact amount is per student, but it starts to have a devastating impact in terms of funding. The second thing is regarding voting, and I guess maybe it may be helpful for the school district or the school board to consider how to partner with community groups and churches to really kind of make sure that people are counted in their communities, not by going to every house, but by taking a look at the persons or the households that have not registered for the census, so as to make sure that everyone is counted, and doing a real public relations campaign, not one of these general government campaigns, but one that is specific to the city of Norfolk and that speaks to specific communities in order to make sure that people are counted. Same thing with voting. One of the efforts that we have is trying to identify, we are in the 23504 area code, and then taking a look at compiling information as to who has voted in previous elections. And our social justice ministry is in the process of developing a plan to reach out to those individuals who have not voted to ensure that they are going to vote, and to reach out to individuals who have not registered to vote, because these are going to be, this is a very critical election. And to ensure that policy, that educational policy is really geared towards helping to meet the needs of our community. And I'll just say this one other thing. Just in conversation with individuals in the Norfolk Public School system, educational leaders and the like, there does need to be a real partnership with faith-based communities, and I know people call them faith-based, but just call it the Black church. Understanding that the church is always in position to leverage its influence, to leverage its location, to leverage its presence within these communities to really kind of try to make a difference in education. Norfolk is never going to be a better city until people are given the skills necessary to ensure that they can move from poverty to prosperity. and that these programs are intended to really educate children and not just help them to pass a test. I concur with Pastor Tyree, who earlier spoke about this. And I'm not on the school board. I've never run for elective office, never will. But I know that you have some real passion for educating. And I think that we have to kind of understand how to educate Black kids and how to educate Black boys. So that's the problem that you have in these systems. You know, people are afraid to talk about the particularities associated with educating Black boys. And you can't have young white, fresh out of college teachers trying to educate these young Black boys that come from these very difficult communities. And I know that that's a hard thing to talk about, but really recruiting Black males and sometimes even recruiting Black pastors, maybe to teach a class or two in some of these schools, whether it's history and the like. You know, just really leveraging our community to help with these schools, because if kids are dropping out of school, and when I say dropping out of school, they're attending, but they are dropping out during the day. They're not engaged. They're not necessarily really working towards learning. It's going to be difficult for the Black community in Norfolk to create positive channels for effective, real, long-lasting change. So that's my rant. I didn't mean to go on but I hope that you got the point of what I was saying about,
I got the point. And
about education, about voting, because the census is the key to electing people who can develop policy that's going to be advantageous and specifically addressed to meeting the needs of Black people. And I think that, and I'll say this, that you know, Black people have to stop apologizing for doing stuff for Black people. Black politicians, Black policymakers, Black people in responsible positions have to stop apologizing or feeling like they can't address issues that relate to Black people, and funneling resources and money to Black communities, because that's the only way we're going to make a difference. We have to talk about issues that relate to Black people. And that's about teaching and education, voting, and policy. So I know you didn't ask me all of that,
but I receive it nonetheless.
I do. Written my heart.
I appreciate it. And cultural competency is something that has definitely come up. And that's, you know, because we've even asked in our teacher preparation programs at some of our predominantly white schools, you know, teaching, you know, when you talk about putting an educator, a fresh new teacher who has not really been in the classroom, for them to understand the community and the population and the demographic for which you're teaching to. And so cultural competency is a very important thing. But I also wrote a note down here because I do believe we have an ability on visiting teachers. And definitely the idea of having Black pastors and others in the community to be able to come in. Virginia, just this year, we are bringing Black history into the curriculum, into our schools. And to be perfectly honest, I benefited from that when I was in school in the 90s, but wasn't really aware that it had gone away. And so a lot of our students just don't understand and have that grasp of where they come from and some of the trials and the tribulations for why things are connected as to looking at now. But I think you were trying to say something else, Reverend, because I didn't mean to cut you off.
I was just going to mention about, you know, the whole idea about cultural competency. I mean, that's a nice way of saying that you have to recruit Black teachers, because it's, now don't take this wrong, and I hope that the viewers don't take this. But white people don't understand Black kids. Now, and I may be wrong with that. I may be completely wrong, and I don't think so. I just think it's impossible for someone who grew up in a white middle class neighborhood, who went to all white schools, who went to a white college, to come to a school like Ruffner or Jaycox, or schools where there are predominantly Black poor kids, come to those schools and really be engaged with, helping those kids to learn, because after a while, there's no cultural connection. And while I think it's important, these teachers, they come to these Black schools, they're just looking to get started so they can move on, and they may not really be interested in educating Black children. Now that's been my experience, and I kind of feel that way. And I think the language of cultural competency, it's a nice terminology, but I think that we really have to work at recruiting Black teachers for these Black schools. Now, Dr. Tyree may have a whole nother position, but that's my position. And I was educated by Black teachers. Black teachers taught me how to read, write, understand history. I had a real cultural connection, and I got a great education because these schools are already segregated. These schools are already segregated, and there's no need in having teachers who have no real interest. Now, that may not be true for all of them. It may not be true for all of them, but a number of them, when they run into some of these Black boys, they just give up and they don't care. They're just there to get a check. I may be wrong. And if I'm wrong, I'll be the first to apologize to any teacher who takes an issue with that. But if you come from a upper middle class neighborhood, you don't understand Project Kids.
Understood. Reverend Tyree, thank you, Reverend Guns.
Thank you, Honorable Clanton and Dr. Guns. Dr. Guns made a statement earlier about unapologetically being pro-Black. I want to kind of connect a few dots with what I've said previously to what he said, and perhaps maybe particularly for the viewer who's been for the duration, to help them see things in a different light. The system in America is broken, and we are all products, right, wrong, good, bad, or indifferent, of a broken system. The reason Dr. Guns, myself, and anybody else who's pro-Black is because the system is broken. So let's say, for example, if I have hiring authority and I'm looking at the resumes of two people, one Black, one white, and I decide I'm going to hire the Black person simply because he's Black. A lot of people would be quick to say, well, that's not fair. You should have taken the most qualified candidate. My question is, plain and simple, name one white person who ever got a job because they were white, who turned it down and said, no, this Black person who's more qualified needs to have it. Dr. Guns identified in his previous statement, he was educated by Black people. I wasn't in any of his classes, but I can almost guarantee you that every one of his educators told him that if you want to make it in this system, you have to be 10 times better than that white person. Now, I want you to listen to that. You have to be 10 times better. Dr. Guns is where he is today as a septuagenarian, quite successful military career in a broken system. Why? Because in reality, he's 10 times better. We're thinking 10 times better makes me average. No, 10 times better makes you 10 times better.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the problem is we, as African Americans, as Black people, are conditioned by the same images that white people are conditioned by. Why? Because we don't control any media.
Mm-hmm.
We don't control any newspapers. We don't have any platform that we own. So consequently, what we see is the same thing that they see, and our reaction might be the same as theirs. I'll give you an example. I wish I had the pictures to be able to show, but The Guardian,
Mm-hmm.
beginning of COVID-19, put out a picture of white people who were face to face with the police yelling and shouting. That's not a video, it's a still shot. They're armed with guns. And the message from white America, even white evangelicals, these are good people. They're just protesting their First and Second Amendment rights, and they need to be protected. Guardian had the same image of people protesting during the death of Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, protesting. The picture was taken at night, and the caption was, "These people are disturbing the peace and are violating local orders, and they need to be arrested." Now, when you see those two, they were taken at two different times, but if you see them side by side, you can see a black-white picture of where we are right now in our society. Now, what does that have to do with voter registration? What does it have to do with education? Well, the first week of voter registration, I decided that I was going to go vote and vote in person. I'd already previously requested an absentee ballot. At least I thought about it, but I wasn't sure if I did it or not. And this would have been back in June. I go, I get the ballot, I stay in line for about an hour. Delegate Cliff Hayes was out on that same day. We were at the same location, the Greenbrier Library. I go in, I vote. Yesterday, my wife voted, and she voted with the understanding because my absentee ballot came in the mail 2 days prior to. And I'm like, okay, what am I supposed to do with this? So she went and she talked to the election official.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to make sure I say this for anybody out there who may want to vote in person, but also requested an absentee ballot. The election official says that if you did not request a mail-in ballot, you'll be given a regular ballot when you go to the polls, and you'll vote, and you can cast your vote and go home, and it'll get counted on November the 3rd.
Yep.
If you requested an absentee ballot and you have it and you want to vote in person, take the absentee ballot with you. And what they will do, they will exchange your mail-in ballot for your regular vote-in ballot, and you can cast your vote and it'll be counted on November the 3rd.
Mm-hmm.
If you requested a mail-in ballot, have not received it, and you insist on early voting, they will give you a provisional ballot. You'll be able to cast your vote, but it will not be counted until weeks after the election. This is their way to make sure that no person voted twice.
Yeah.
Now, for those people who might be in my category whose subsequent ballot came in, I will go to the polls on Monday and find out what you need to do. Mm-hmm. Now, by the same token, in Fairfax on the first weekend, mm-hmm. there were people who went to the polls, white people who went to the polls and said to some black people who were there, y'all just wait, Trump gonna show you when we get another 4 more years. Sounds like voter intimidation to me. What can we do? Well, I think there's some preaching, praying pastors out there. There may be even some who are packing. For those who are not packing, I want to encourage every pastor, every man or woman of faith to get registered for a firearm. And I think we need to show up at the polls armed and packing, as well as praying and preaching, to ensure that our people are not intimidated to cast their vote, because they see respected people of the community that they know and love who are out there to ensure their safety, and they get to exercise their amendment rights. And I also think to see what the response is going to be when they see pastors packing at the polls.
Pastors praying and packing. Well, I can definitely tell individuals that the number one thing you have is to make sure you get that vote. And I appreciate you, Reverend Tyree, in reminding individuals. I've actually got my absentee ballot came in the mail. I made that request. I'll be able to take this and hand deliver it in. But we're encouraging individuals, definitely, if you have until October 13th to register to vote, make sure that you are registered to vote. And then most importantly, execute. Order, request your ballot early. We have several locations within it. I know in our various cities, particularly here in Norfolk, you can go to the registrars, and as well as there's 4 other additional locations that you can go to vote and to make sure that your voice is heard. And the other thing I just want to remind individuals is that you have now until the 31st of October to participate in the census. This is how we determine our voting strength in Congress. This is how we determine our lines of our representation. But most importantly, this is how we determine federal dollars into our communities to support our public education and to support major projects that we have here in our communities. I want to thank all of you all for being here. I know we are well over time. We're 11:34, but when I started putting this together and I mentioned this, they said, well, when you put a group of Baptist preachers together, we're in trouble. But this is a series of conversations, and I appreciate you all. I intentionally today wanted to have Black ministers to have a conversation there, because there's a different perspective. And I am looking forward to having other, and as well as females. As I can tell you, I want to have at least about 3 additional conversations here leading up to the election. I'm even looking at having representatives from the casino, because there's been a lot of individuals there's mail-in information going out and saying that this is going to support public education. Well, I really want to dig down into how is this going to actually support public education, and for individuals in the community to be able to ask questions. But I appreciate you all always being a great sounding board and always being authentic and letting me know and letting me hear the voices of the individuals in our communities. And I appreciate the work that you are doing each and every day, and you have been doing for years in your communities with your congregations to uplift and to really reach out to those who don't have a voice and to ensure that they have a voice there. So, gentlemen, if there's nothing else, do you have anything else final that you want to say?
No, I'd just say thank you, Brother Clanton, for having us this morning. And I want to encourage your audience to really kind of get behind you and let's make a difference through education. And let's really kind of work at making sure that we can educate our kids. Get out and vote, make sure you vote, and make sure that you talk to your neighbors about filling out and completing the census.
Thank you. Reverend Tyree?
Ditto.
Great. Well, brothers, I appreciate you. Enjoy your Saturday. Taking out of here. And for everyone else who is watching here today, again, I thank you for joining. You can find additional information. I made mention earlier that I am having a Ward 3 community conversation this coming Tuesday. That will be taking place live on Facebook. You also will be able to watch it on Periscope as well as YouTube. Chime in with your comments, your questions, and I will address them. But we definitely want to have a conversation in regards to our public schools, school reopening, this COVID-19, virtual learning, the casino, other issues that are concerning you as it relates back to public education. I don't take it for granted for the opportunity for which I have to represent your voice and to represent it through my vote on the Norfolk City School Board. And I am a proud product of Norfolk Public Schools and a lifelong resident of this city. And as my motto and the slogan says, I am student-centered and teacher-inspired. And I appreciate each and every one of you. So enjoy the rest of your Saturday and your weekend. And definitely feel free to reach out to me if I can ever be of any assistance to you. Have a great one.